Okay, that's me, Brendan. I'm on Twitter, like everyone. I'm an independent designer and front-end dev, and I run a business called Gravity Department since 2009-ish. I do consulting, and then I do some product development on the side, a lot more consulting recently. Um, Companies hire me to steer their front-end strategy, basically. I help understand their products, get their customers' minds in my head, and then help them set priorities and execute both the design and the technical side of what they need to do business in a multi-device world. So on the side, I make some products, like I said. Acumen, I've been saying this for years that I'm going to have version 2 ready, and I'm actually really close. So I'll ping you out about that later. Please check it out. But basically, I help companies use design as a tool to solve their business challenges. So for me, good design comes from questioning a lot of things that they do and just thinking about it. And what I try to do is frame their problem from multiple perspectives. And that means putting both their business and their customers on equal footing. So I spent kind of the first 4 years of my career working on the B2C side, helping them grow into this world where there are devices of all kinds of sizes with responsive design. And then about 3 years ago, I started consulting with a company called Watsco, which is the largest HVAC distributor in the world. And they're a B2B business through and through, and they operate through a handful of subsidiary companies that are competitors. So I'm a design and front-end lead for 2 of those businesses. One's Gemaire, which won the Magento B2B UX Award last year, and the other one's Carrier Enterprise, which is their biggest company, and they have 12 regional B2B sites across North America. They all operate independently, but they share the same code base, so maintenance-wise, that's a pretty big challenge for us. And I'd really love to keep talking about responsive stuff because that's my bread and butter day-to-day. I live in that. But today I want to share what I've learned working on the B2B side because customer expectations there are fundamentally influenced by everything you see in the B2C world. But in a lot of cases, they're significantly more complex. And the tactics that we use to make a difference in the lives of B2B sellers and buyers are pretty interesting. So there was a white paper last year from Oracle that divided the challenges B2B sellers face basically into 3 categories. The first one's revenue growth, then you have complexity management, and customer experience management. So those are basically the exact same challenges that B2C companies face. But the elephant in the room is that for B2B, businesses have a lot more complexity they have to manage because they know who their customer is, and they move so much slower because they have to handle all these edge cases and backdoor deals that they've done throughout the years. So because that B2B relationship is fundamentally different than how a consumer buys, the B2B customer has to continue transacting, or the B2B seller has to continue transacting with less sophistication and in a lot of cases some much more ancient technology. But what's happened is you have this rapid escalation of B2C growth, and the proliferation of the mobile internet and devices in the last 5 years has put a lot of pressure on the B2B side to catch up very quickly. And all B2B buyers are the same people like you and me, so all their expectations are rooted in what they see in their personal shopping experiences. But it's kind of unfortunate. Many B2B companies still have 0 e-commerce functionality, and less than a third of those that do have invested any money whatsoever in supporting multiple devices. So among them, about 18% are using native apps, around 26 have responsive sites today, and the reality is that B2B businesses are either falling further toward irrelevance or they're hurtling forward very quickly to try to deploy technology because they know that right now that's their primary business driver. So the customer is really forcing them to act. And kind of like the downward spiral in brick and mortar retail commerce, 56% of buyers in the B2B space would rather be buying online next year. And today, 74% of those buyers research more than half of their work-related purchases online, but only about 30% of them can actually complete that purchase online. So that's a huge disconnect between what the seller actually wants, or what the buyer actually wants to do, and what the seller is enabling them to do. So by simply replicating your B2B sales process online, you're not necessarily going to be successful because that doesn't bridge the gap between a B2C shopping experience and what a B2B buyer is trying to do today. And that's an important distinction because consumers do this thing called shopping, and it's a process that restarts for almost every purchase they make. They may be conscious of an in-store experience, and that can be informative to them. It can be delightful. It can engage them. It doesn't have to do any of those things, but that helps you make a sale. And consumers are really used to this idea that they comparison shop, and they do it pretty ruthlessly to get the best price. But you've probably noticed in the last couple of years that prices are almost the same everywhere you shop. And that's a reason that people go straight to Amazon, because they know the price isn't going to be better anywhere else, and it kind of saves you time. Yeah, who does that? So when everything else is equal, the price, the selection, the quality of the goods, consumers are going to develop their loyalty based on the services that are offered. So if you look at Amazon, they have loyalty because they designed this service called Prime, and it promises that you'll get two-day free shipping on over 20 million items. So you know that if you go to Amazon, they're going to be the best at delivering those commodity products. So you don't even bother going to the manufacturer sites or shopping around. But businesses are run by people. So they care about the same things consumers do, but they buy things very differently. They have a special word for it. It's called procurement. Businesses don't like to shop because shopping takes time, and that's a resource that they have to pay for. So when a business buys, they often know exactly what they need. And a business doesn't want to choose a supplier, or a business wants to choose a supplier and then make that relationship work because it's expensive for them to rethink that change. And consumers kind of behave the same way. That's why Amazon's so convenient. You keep going back to them. But it also explains why we still buy from niche stores. So I buy all my motorcycle gear from a company called Revzilla because their co-founder, Anthony, is the best. He makes these 5 to 10 minute videos detailing every product, the pros and the cons of it, which is not something you see on most stores. And I probably watched 10 hours of this guy talking in my life so far. And he earns so much trust for their brand because his reviews are detailed and they're not sugar-coated and they're ubiquitous. Almost every product that they sell on there has it. So as you watch him, you develop these insights and you can kind of listen to what he says and really believe him because he's talking about the same things over multiple product cycles. So I know if Revit comes out with a bad back protector one year, he's not going to sugarcoat it and try to make me buy it. So for them, they have this service, which is the voice of a reliable expert, which makes them stand out in the sea of other sites, including a company like Amazon, that just can't deliver that to me. It's all randos on the internet who may or may not have been given this thing for a free trial. So they make me a safer and a smarter rider than if I bought the same site from Amazon. And that helps them win customers because they designed this service that's more valuable than their products is. And in the past, B2B sellers negotiated exclusive rights or distribution deals, but technology has really enabled manufacturers to grow and diversify their partnerships so they're not tied into one distributor or vendor. Now they're investing in online sales directly, and that shifts the landscape for a company whose whole business is distribution because they relied on that strong support channel and exclusivity. And those support groups that they maintained used to be their competitive advantage. So a B2B seller today really needs to adapt by designing a service that becomes critical to their customers' success. And they need to do more than just stock and fulfill orders to build value for a B2B buyer. And investing in services that do that will pay off for them both online and offline if they're a brick and mortar retailer too. So the way I look at it is that good design is always a multiplier for a strong business, but designing services for B2B buyers is very different than designing for conversion in a consumer site. A consumer usually has to be sold on a single product to convert, and a business has to be sold on the long-term relationship to convert. So B2B sellers depend on developing that relationship for repetitive purchasing because their margins are generally lower than B2C, and a buyer who dips into that system and then never purchases again can actually cost the business money because of the onboarding costs taking that customer on. But if they're a happy customer, a B2B buyer becomes a stable revenue stream unlike anything that you see in the B2C world. And the best way to do that is by designing the user experience around services that become indispensable to that buyer's success. So I'm going to walk through about 9 areas that you can design that help set you apart as a B2B seller, and you can ensure that your customer becomes hooked to you as a business. So B2B sites are much more likely than B2C sites to become walled gardens. It's common that pricing and availability and sometimes even the whole catalog is inaccessible to a guest user, someone that's not yet signed in. And 44% of B2B buyers say that onboarding is too complex. So customer acquisition is really challenging in B2B for two reasons. One, you need to convince potential users that they should register with these invisible propositions of value. And the process to actually register is complex. So many B2B sellers won't allow you to register because you may buy below a minimum quantity, or they're restricted by a partner agreement, or you need some specific license to purchase an item that's restricted for distribution. And other B2B sites will allow a consumer to shop, but the terms and prices that are advertised to a business are totally different, and they're not accessible by a consumer. So you need to find a way to separate these two groups. And your business buyers really will not be happy if you start selling your product direct and the consumers start bypassing the pricing markup that they depend on to run their business. In my case, it's like HVAC supplies. If you just went to the manufacturer and bought an air conditioner for 2/3 of the price, your contractor will not be happy when you ask them to install it. For new customers, registering may require vetting of business information or trade licenses. So it's best to clearly state all the information that a potential customer needs up front before they get started. Because if they don't have something, they're much less likely to restart that process on another day when they have to come back and get all that info that you need. And your sales team may actually take several days or more to activate a new account. But the expectation online is pretty high. So if you leave a user pending in this quasi-registered status for a couple days, it just gives them an opportunity to write you off and look for another business to work with. So if possible, what you can do is grant the user access immediately so they can start exploring the system's potential to work in their business. And during that quasi-registered stage, you may disable parts of the user experience or critical functionality like actually placing an order. But it's better to let those new users engage with the system immediately after registration than forcing them to wait for a sales call to get fully vetted. And it's very possible that your business processes are going to have to change to support those expectations that people have with a digital service as opposed to your offline business. And ideally, you should try to automate that contract creation flow so new customers get activated without needing manual intervention, but a lot of times that's just unavoidable. So if onboarding has a standardized set of terms, meaning a customer can't begin buying until a salesperson has reviewed their account, then you need another step to make that process quicker. And existing customers need just as much care in onboarding to a set of digital services. It's really a mistake to assume that they're all very eager to adopt a new digital workflow, even if it's obviously going to benefit their business. Many are going to be so busy, especially if it's a seasonal business, and they'll be fine using the current process. So for GemAir and CE, we built a totally separate registration path for customers they already do business with, so they could link their offline accounts to their online businesses. And in theory, this would have been very easy because we could validate their data directly in the ERP and confirm they're a customer. It should have been like a snap. But what we learned is that it's better to validate that info very loosely, because when they accept the registration process, a sales rep's going to see it and review it anyway. And in practice, we found that even when a customer copy-pasted from an email they received or from an invoice, they didn't type it in exactly perfect. So it's better to very loosely vet that info, and things like capitalization or punctuation are really not important to making sure it's the right customer, or it just could be outdated in their ERP records. And some of their best customers got very frustrated with the first interaction with our digital services because they found it hard to register with the sites, and that made it even harder to win them back and convince them to do business with us online. So after we did that in a trial stage, we learned that the best thing that you can do is onboard existing customers just by creating accounts for them. Then you have a sales rep who knows John at Heating ABC got created today. They can schedule a sales call, reach out to them, sell the benefits of the new system, and on the phone walk them through doing their first order. So by the time they get done with that meeting, they know exactly what the new system's going to do for them, but they didn't have to do any of that legwork up front. And if you just send them a link inviting them to register, you'll really see that you get a mixed bag of results, and you really miss an opportunity to redefine that sales relationship with the customer. You can also get a lot of unfiltered feedback from them on that first call from somebody who's assessing the system for the very first time, because you've been staring at this for months and months at this point. So you can take a lot of that feedback in, and that's why we roll things out in stages to different groups of customers. Doing it for your customers is difficult, but consider that you always need to do this for your employees as well. So there's a company called Crescent Electric Supply, and they learned that the hard way, and it really stalled the growth of their new e-commerce platform. People are always going to resist an e-commerce channel if they're doing traditional phone sales or person-to-person relationships, because to them it's going to feel like a competitor. You probably remember an episode of The Office where Dwight Schrute challenged the company's e-commerce system to a paper sell-off. He was really terrified of losing his job because they make money based on commissions. The key to getting employees on your side with a new digital system like this is early education. So don't blindside them when you launch an e-commerce system. Send them progress reports as the platform is under development. And that gives them time to raise concerns, and it'll also help to improve the end result because they have useful feedback that, maybe they're not pushing up the chain. They need opportunities personally to reinvest themselves and feel responsibility for making that system work because it's going to be critical to their jobs. So couple of things that we found were helpful is we recorded training sessions and we documented basically everything we did onboarding our employees. And that saved us time in the long run because as we bring new people in or they're moving up within the organization, we can point them to things that'll help them get a head start much quicker. But producing that useful content does take time and effort. So you really need to plan ahead to make sure people with the right knowledge about a certain area can be involved early enough in the game so you can produce those things when you do need to roll it out to your whole organization. And if your e-commerce team is siloed within one division, it tends to alienate a traditional sales team who view those as totally separate departments. So the organizations that drive the best growth through the e-commerce channel are the ones that become really comfortable seeing that channel shift. Because eventually your online revenue is going to push up each year. It's going to be 10 and then 20 and then 30 and then 40% of your sales. And it's going to go higher than that eventually. So the attribution model that your salespeople use needs to change fundamentally in a lot of cases to reflect where those leads are coming from. And there are a lot of ways to slice it, but online sales from accounts that are owned by a salesman, you kind of have to attribute them back to the person. It can't be marked as an e-commerce sale. And new accounts that are driven by just normal organic internet growth, we try to distribute them fairly. So you get homed to a salesman rather than being homed to a digital channel, because then you're just cutting people out of all the growth. And that may seem a little odd because the salesman didn't technically generate that lead, but their role in the company is going to change once you have these systems out there. Customers won't need to make a sales call to get quotes or to place orders because they're going to be doing those things online now. So rather than fearing becoming obsolete by a new system, a revived sales team can spend more time growing their customer base because they're served more efficiently. And with more time, sales can be proactive about addressing the actual needs of a customer, and they're doing less of that manual order-taking labor. So giving salespeople that visibility and power to interact with a customer online, it's really vital to establishing and maintaining the relationships through the channel shift. Not all of your customers are going to want that, but if your salespeople aren't involved, you're really setting them up to fail within the organization. So data is a huge advantage for e-commerce companies, and before you can support incoming business across multiple channels, you need the ERP integrations to connect those lines of business, because a customer really sees no distinction between buying offline in your store or online or the desktop or on their mobile device. All the services that your company needs to be consistent for an omni-channel customer, it's just important that they transact fluidly. So a PIM system, product information management, is a new challenge that distributors are working with for moving beyond that single channel. So B2B companies that have a major investment in defining and implementing a PIM system can assess the quality of data they get from vendors much quicker, and that helps them to launch those products into e-commerce much, much, much faster. So at Watsco, we were really fortunate that they established this team before we got started on e-commerce initiatives, and they've done a really phenomenal job of stewarding a PIM that now serves all the business units simultaneously. And that becomes really important when vendors supply their product data to us, because their standards are going to be all over the place. They're going to have new lines that have one format and old stuff that they still sell that's just missing 50% of the data. And you need a way to say, this is good, this is not good, this needs improvement, and hand it back to them, or to correct it yourselves. So developing the process to intake and evaluate and normalize all that is a big effort, but that can really make or break a company that supplies tens or hundreds of thousands of SKUs. And these are a couple options if you're looking at PIMs for Magento. So last year I spoke a lot about designing along the conversion path, and in the section about wayfinding, I focused on hierarchical navigation and taxonomy design. And this really determines how users find their way to a product, but it also gives them a subliminal teaching about the breadth of products that you offer. So that's still really important in a B2B space, because a B2C consumer needs that kind of clarification of what kind of company you are. But that day-to-day value of navigation becomes a lot more difficult for a B2B company. Search is a much more effective starting point for them, because the taxonomy in these cases is generally so broad that it's hard enough for them to explore and navigate it. It's much quicker for them to start with a SKU or a product type that they're thinking of offhand. So the behavior of B2B buyers is different, because they're not shopping, and often they know exactly what they're looking for. And for them to drill down category through category, it just doesn't help them find one specific copper fitting out of hundreds of variations. So if you look at a site like Amazon or Alibaba, they break that sort of department store mold. If there's any kind of widget or thing, they probably sell it, and they don't really guide you into a taxonomy, because it's really inefficient for you to start that navigation in a hierarchy. They're just too unwieldy to visualize, even on a large screen. And often you can't model them conceptually. So something like a table or lawn furniture could be in home furnishings, could be in outdoor. You just don't know where to start often. So the baseline search experience is often very simple. It's just a text input and a button. And then you can use things like type ahead or auto suggest or autocomplete to augment that query and help show them things that are relevant to your catalog before they've actually committed to submitting it. And you can save them a click a lot of times by matching against a product name or a specific brand or the actual SKU that they've typed in. And B2B buyers are really different in that a lot of them know products by heart by the SKU. They don't really know what the product name is, but they know it's 2249AB78 because they buy it every day. And that's the fastest way for them to find it. So search enhancements are pretty far from standardized. A research company called Bainbridge Institute did a nice set of documentation on a lot of UX variances that you see in search. Things like query highlighting, scoping of data, different result types, like categories or products or existing queries that people have run or specific pages. And what you see a lot is that stores that have separate desktop sites or mobile apps, they tend to behave inconsistently because a lot of e-commerce companies tend to buy their technology rather than building it, and that can lead to a disconnected user experience. So for example, Home Depot, they have multiple digital stores and everyone behaves differently when you search. On their desktop site, they show you a scope, a suggested query, products, categories, and brands, kind of like the kitchen sink. And then if you go to their mobile site, they only show you suggested queries, categories, and brands. And their iPhone app only shows queries. It doesn't show any of the other 5 that we started with. So if a contractor goes out and searches for a quote on his laptop and then later uses his phone to check local inventory, he's going to be disappointed, because on Home Depot, you can't search for a product directly and then see that result in the type ahead. So if you're a user who took the extra step to actually go out and download the Home Depot app, you have the least utility compared to someone who's doing it on the desktop site. So relying on a vendor to build all that search tech can not only unhinge your consistency, but it also changes the relevance and the ranking of your search results. They may implement different indexes or algorithms, and that difference is just going to be confusing to a customer. So the last thing that a marketer wants to do is create another redundant platform for something they already have, and then you're going to have to tune those queries for each class of device that you're supporting. So this is kind of a win of responsive design in that you get the same content, accessible, familiarity. It's all maximized with this approach. So you can make sure that your search behavior, the traversal, and the content you show is universal. Webstaurant Store does this. They show keywords, categories, products, and vendors on all different types of devices to great effect. So we built the same thing into CE and GemAir. It powers any type of access, the desktop site, browsers on the tablet, the phone, through the web, or through apps where we embed a web view for shopping. It doesn't really matter which approach you take, it's going to be the same. Personalization is a thing that nobody really wants to shut up about right now. It's such a broad term. So if you have the fundamentals of e-commerce down, just enabling selling to one customer, this nondescript person, personalization builds on that with sophistication to consider the customer as part of the selling equation. And that can have so many outcomes, but most personalization efforts fall into three camps. For a business, the most desired personalization approach is algorithmic merchandising. So shoppers do their thing while some software invisibly watches them and learns from behavior in the background. And then it'll automate capturing data to formulate a shift in trends that say, if you bought something this way, we think in the future you'll buy something like this. Amazon's kind of the king of doing that right now. And if you watch with every page load, they'll continually change what they recommend to you based on the last set of pages you've been to. Another way to look at it is crowdsourced buying. And this can shield the maker from inefficiencies of finding market fit for their products. So Cotton Bureau is a B2B manufacturer that kind of masquerades as a B2C site. They harness the wisdom of crowds for their entire business model. So an independent shirt designer will pre-sell their idea on Cotton Bureau without contracting any production or distribution for a product that they don't know if people want to buy. And then based on the pre-sales, Cotton Bureau will manufacture, distribute, and pay royalties back to the designer. So this model for personalization lowers the upfront costs by bringing the products to market, and it reduces the distributor's risk of buying inventory that it may not sell. On-demand productions and customization is probably the most expensive personalization to implement because it requires state-of-the-art manufacturing technology to make it efficient and affordable to do at scale. But for premium products, that differentiation can be a differentiator. So for one of the northern arcs in Road to Imagine, I needed a windproof base layer because it got cold in Idaho. So I went to harleydavidson.com. Just kidding, don't shop there. Their stuff's crap. I wanted to get something that's really light and warm because that's what people wear in windy places. So Eddie Bauer, decades ago, made this thing called the B9 Parka for fighter pilots in the Second World War. And they patented a quilted down jacket that the first American to summit Everest wore back in 1963. And they kind of lost their roots in between. They got more into consumer-focused clothing. But a couple years ago, they went back and reintroduced this expedition-grade gear they call the First Ascent line. And it holds up to what you see from companies like Patagonia or Mountain Hardwear that just do that really hardcore climber gear. But it didn't really stand out because it was just like their consumer stuff. So last year, they introduced a thing called Eddie Bauer Custom. And it's really easy to fall in love with it because 2 of their First Ascent layers are now fully customizable and made to order. So you can build, this is their Storm Down jacket. It matches my bike. It looks great on or off it. And if it gets wet and soaked by rain, it doesn't matter because it all just sheds off. So personalization tactics for B2C are mostly applicable to B2B, but they also extend to pricing and fulfillment when you're selling to businesses. You can drive huge value for B2B buyers and your company by transitioning the quoting process from salesman to self-service online. And if you deliver those real-time quotes for pricing and inventory that are actionable, that can be a real game changer because the doors of your store stay open all the time. About half of B2B buyers say personalization is the key reason that they choose a supplier. But it requires bringing that complex business logic and, most importantly, all those relationships that you have to the online space. And different customers can have very different pricing terms and expectations of what they're going to be offered. Fulfillment can also require an equally complex set of logic for each customer. In a lot of cases, a B2B supplier has to manage their legacy commitments to buyers while planning for a future expansion and marketing plans that are suited to e-commerce rather than their offline businesses. So from a customer perspective, it's your responsibility to deliver the same services and terms that they receive offline, even if you account for those special accommodations made by one sales rep. And on top of this, you need to streamline all this complexity so it's easier for that customer than just picking up the phone and asking for a quote. Because when you lose that personal touch with a salesman, you need to guarantee that your digital services are going to be an order of magnitude faster and more accurate for them to make the leap. From a tech standpoint, it's a challenge as well. Pricing for B2C sites is typically universal, maybe at the national or the country scale. Even though fulfillment may be centralized and distributed, the general concern for a customer is whether the product is in stock or not. That makes it pretty simple to deliver the same view to all customers. But when pricing and fulfillment depend on the specific customer choosing to buy it, and their purchase orders requirements are maybe unique to that person too, then all those variables need to be calculated in real time. So to work around some of those performance constraints, we moved all of our pricing and inventory and order specifics asynchronously to help speed up the experience. This way the page can start rendering faster, and then all the data that's unique to that customer and personalized can load in progressively as we have it available. Because our ERP systems, in a lot of cases, are so old, they're not going to have the response time that a brand new 64-core server does. You can build the page a lot quicker than you can get that data back for them. And one of the things that sets a B2B buyer apart is the volume and frequency of orders once they've chosen a supplier. So unlike B2C, where you need to be presented with products and sold on the benefits, once a B2B person is convinced of buying from your store, it's pretty easy to take care of them because you just need to keep delivering the same products. And adding individual items to cart is not enough when a customer is placing dozens of orders a day for different jobs. So designing a more efficient way for B2B buyers to purchase from you is really going to elevate their experience relative to what you're seeing when you shop on any consumer site. So to start, enabling direct rebuying of past orders is huge. They'll often purchase the same mix of products again and again and again for restocking. So adding a button just to their order page is really helpful. Then they can customize it as they check out. But it's also useful to be able to convert past orders to subscriptions so they don't have to do that process week after week. Just let them set it up on a schedule and the same products will get delivered. Creating a new order is a different challenge. For sites that have thousands of products, a buyer may need 5+ clicks to narrow down to a single item before they can add it to cart. And that takes a lot of time if your job is buying 400 items a day. So something like Quick Order helps a buyer quickly fill a cart full of items that they know that they need. Let them search directly by a name or an item number, and then the suggestions get presented to them immediately. So unlike a traditional search where the user visits a product page and then makes the decision, as soon as they type in a number, that item's going into their cart. They know exactly what they're buying. And they can easily gather a list of 10 or 15 items in under a minute and assign a quantity that they need to each one so they can enter checkout in 60 seconds or less. And the quick list has to be personalized too. So all that pricing and inventory info needs to be specific to that customer so they can know that if they place this order and get it fulfilled today, they're going to be able to get all those items tomorrow or the day after. For GemAir, we iterated this one step further to support copy pasting a huge list of numbers from Excel. So if you just bring in 1,000 rows, you can just put them all into your cart at once and then hit checkout. And that's something you'd normally have to call and say, run my usual quote to a salesman. So for many businesses, buying isn't a continual string of independent orders. So it's a hassle to find an old order and recreate it. So you can repurpose wish lists and kind of supercharge it for a B2B experience. Give people the ability to have multiple wish lists, let them create unique collections for different activities, some for restocking, some for buying for a specific job, and let them create their own templates that help standardize the equipment and parts that they need for activities that they do. So maybe they're creating custom quotes for multiple jobs as they're being spec'd out, but they don't know if they're ready to buy this yet. If they put all that stuff into the cart, they would then have to delete it or move it somewhere else temporarily and save it. But letting them build those lists up externally and then place an order with that list really helps them to do multiple things at once. And that gets even better when you combine some of those power features with personalization. So we actually built Quick Order as an extensible searching interface. All it really does is help a buyer build a product collection quickly. So we integrated the Quick Order with the wish list functionality. So if you're building out a list, you can search directly inside the list and add to it without having to navigate out to product pages to find this item and add to my list and this item and add to my list. Of course, items can always be added directly to the cart, but you can take a few additional modifications along the way. If you let them save the desired quantity of an item, then they don't have to go back and set that when they add to cart. They can truly mass buy in the future using their lists. Sometimes the buyer will create a list with substitute items and optional add-ons, and they never really intend to buy the whole list, so they kind of treat it like a custom order builder for them. And that's really powerful because they can go through and check just the boxes they want in that list and then shift all of them to the cart. And the other ones, they can just leave there and maybe they'll use them on another job. And when lists get really sophisticated and buyers start using them heavily like that, they need better tools to manage them. So you let customers name them whatever they want, give them the capability to take multiple lists and merge them together or split a list into two different lists. There's a lot of ways you can help them to design their own system because you can't think of all the ends they're going to use it for. And if you take the time to listen to a buyer that uses your site regularly, they'll come back to you with no shortage of feedback for ways that you can tailor it better to them. Sometimes buyers don't know exactly what they're looking for, but they know a piece of related information. So for example, a repairman might need to order a replacement part for a piece of equipment, but he doesn't know the part of the item he needs. He only knows the equipment's number. So a product finder is a great solution for that, where they can start with the high-level information that they know and then narrow it down to the subcomponents that are included in that item. And that's way faster for them than actually taking the unit apart and looking at the item to find the number stamped into it, or looking at it like a PDF schematic they have to pinch and zoom into to get that info. And that can also function as a cross-selling tool. So if the same repairman needs a new part, it might be expensive. And if he has to buy that from the original manufacturer, he might not make the sale to the customer. So if you can use that product finder to show him alternatives from third-party vendors that make replacements, you might be able to sell your own off-brand part and get more percentage of the sale. So that can be a big revenue increaser for you if you're a distributor that also produces your own product. And that's a great example, again, of where a PIM system is really necessary to make those queries and complex relationships between the products in your system. So if you don't have that raw data, it's really hard to have an advantage from all those connections. Another way you can merchandise effectively with personalization is by extracting a buyer's purchase history and making that useful to them. So for GemAir, we built this feature called My Products, and it makes a categorical breakdown of everything that they buy most recently and frequently in the site. It's not necessarily what they would put into lists, but it gives them an ever-running tally of these are the items that you're probably going to buy on any given day. And then they can take that, and if they want to, save it to a permanent list or export it to analyze in Excel or somewhere else. For CE, we built a product history search that renders their purchase frequency graph for certain items in the site, and it can pull every order that they've done that contains that item. So that can be really useful if you're trying to find an obscure part that was purchased with another item, but you don't necessarily know what that other item is. It gives you an avenue to search for it. Those kind of features are really uncommon in B2C sites because they remind consumers how much money they've spent, and that can impede sales in a lot of cases. But to a business, it can really help them to make smarter buying decisions and save some time in the future if that buying process can be automated. So customers don't really care about their channels. To them, like we said, online and offline are the same thing. Mobile, desktop, same thing. App, website, same thing. Your support team needs to be trained and has the authority to resolve these issues across channels. They can't call in and go, sorry, we're only help desk support for the branches, or we only do app support here. You have to call someone else for the website. Home Depot did $4.7 billion online in 2015, and online sales were only about 5% of that. But they noticed a really interesting problem they had. About 40% of the online orders that they did ended up in the store in some way, shape, or form. So based on sales data, it might not seem critical to develop programs that unify their online and offline operations, but your customers aren't seeing those lines. So if you think through those services holistically, you can do better business on the terms that a customer is going to contact you on. And I keep referring to the B2B buyer as a generic term, but it's important to remember that it's a persona that takes a lot of different shapes and forms today, and they'll have unique requirements that need to be served in original ways. So for example, today, more than half of B2B executives say they have customers that could only be served online profitably. We also have demographic trends in the population that are continually suggesting e-commerce is going to gain on retail sales and quickly become a more important channel in the future. So it's important to think about who is going to be joining the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years and how they'll fit into an organization in that future. So if you look at millennials, they're the first generation globally where internet use is just a universal trait. In every nation surveyed by Pew Research, they found that people 18 to 24 were the most likely to use the internet and smartphones. And in an emerging economy, that trend was even more exaggerated because their elder population is more behind the curve. So like in the US, 3 out of 4 have smartphones, whereas 92% of millennials do. 75% of them make purchases on their phone, and 36% of this younger group say they're online almost constantly. It's just a continual part of their life. Right now, the B2B buyer is under 35. That's who you're building these systems for. And because 34% of the labor force is millennials, that's now a bigger group than boomers or Gen X. So as that working population shifts toward people that are more and more willing and interested in using technology to do their jobs, it's going to become harder and harder to do business without making this critical. Even today, 3 in 4 B2B buyers would prefer to do their research online rather than picking up the phone and talking to your sales reps. So you need to really prepare for that cultural shift that's coming within the B2B space, because workers in the future are going to continue to consider those digital services a vital part of the relationships, and that's who they're going to choose to buy from. It's not necessarily going to be on product or price, it's going to be on their personal ease of doing the relationship. So wrap up, that's a lot to consider when designing for a B2B experience. I hope those ideas give you some ways that you can improve in the future and be successful. And thank you.